Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to tell you about a neighbor who behaves like the owner of my land. Always kept to myself, especially with my property. As long as I can remember, I've maintained boundary lines, fences, and property records. If you don't protect what's yours, no one else will, my father said. But it's been true more times than I can count. Perhaps that's why this incident scared me so much. In my wildest dreams, I never imagined waking up to find a huge septic tank installed behind my house on my land by a local homeowners association with improper permission. Strangely, a neighbor with no right to give permission gave it. Warren, my neighbor, shamelessly pretended to own part of my property and gave these people the go-ahead. It was almost too late when I realized what happened. I had a huge eyesore and health risks in my backyard, a lot of legal headaches, and a neighbor who kept telling me to let it go. Giving up was never an option. Property is everything to me. I built my life here after inheriting this land from my grandparents. They worked for decades to turn a barren plot into a home. The orchard my grandfather planted stands, but I had to reinforce the older fruit trees. Near the house is my grandmother's herb garden, a reminder of the simple joys she taught me every summer. This is no throwaway asset, my heritage, livelihood, and future. Warren wasn't always a scary neighbor. He used to be polite but chatty. He would stop by to say hi, ask about the orchard, or ask if I was building on my land. I politely answered his questions without suspecting a motive. I thought he was curious about his surroundings. I didn't realize he used his curiosity to defraud a local HOA. My neighborhood isn't typical suburban. No homeowners association covers my property. I live next to an older residential development, but I've never joined or followed their rules. Mapleview HOA is their local name, but I'm using it for description. They manage about 30 houses built after I moved here. Over the last decade, they appeared gradually, always mindful of local mailbox color and yard decoration regulations. My land predates that development, so I'm not under their jurisdiction. Mapleview HOA decided to install a new septic system for reasons I didn't understand. According to my research, some of their older lines were failing, so they looked for a place to bury a large new septic tank to serve a number of shared units. They wanted more land to reduce excavation costs and keep their neatly manicured common areas free of large construction projects. An HOA usually consults with local authorities, gets a land survey, and handles all bureaucracy. But Warren stepped in. He claimed ownership of the section of my land near the property line. He claimed I sold him a small parcel. He told Mapleview HOA that. Through their scattered paperwork, I discovered Mapleview HOA had requested proof of ownership. Warren, cunning, fabricated documents. A questionable agreement with a forged signature was printed. He provided a land survey that was apparently doctored to favor him. His thorough forgeries left little room for doubt, especially to the untrained HOA board members. He spoke in technical jargon and referenced minor county regulations like an expert, likely using online resources. Mapleview HOA wanted a cheap solution. They said placing the septic tank on another part of their property would have required more excavation, permits, and machinery. By building on Warren's land, they could save money. Their deal with him was lucrative: a lump sum nuisance fee, plus a monthly allowance for using his property to host the septic tank and lines. Warren readily signed a contract with them, waiving all Mapleview liability claims to get that money. While pocketing the down payment, he made subtle changes to his yard to pretend this land was an extension of his. He once told me he was planning some improvements behind his house with a neighborly grin. It was ignored at the time. A work project took me out of state a few days after that conversation. Large tire treads and heavy equipment tracks were unusual near my orchard when I returned. Alarmed, I walked around to check for damaged trees and shrubs. My orchard was mostly unharmed, but I found grass flattening and possible digging. Still, nothing indicated a new septic system. It looked like construction trash. A small sign read, "Under construction by Mapleview HOA," with a phone number. That immediately raised concerns. Mapleview HOA had no business on my property. Calling the sign number was my first step. A woman answered as Mapleview HOA's project coordinator and was clueless when I said, "You're building on someone else's land. Please stop." She gasped and said, "But we got permission from the landowner." I replied, "I am the landowner." She stammered and said, "We were told the land belonged to Warren, who said he had clear title to that whole parcel." My stomach lurched. Warren assured me everything was normal and that any machinery I saw was just routine yard work. I never imagined he was involved in such a scheme. I requested a HOA board meeting immediately. They agreed to meet me days later. In the meantime, I hired a land surveyor to verify the boundaries to support my claims. My house's small safe holds the original deed and property documents, which I removed. Everything showed I was the sole owner. I attended the meeting at the Mapleview HOA's small office, which is a clubhouse. 3 board members, the project coordinator I spoke with, and Mapleview HOA president were there. Warren was invited but didn't show up. I was initially concerned, but I assumed he was avoiding responsibility. The president apologized for the inconvenience, but insisted they had Warren's land ownership documents. A file was slid across the table to me. I paged through. A suspicious sale agreement with a different signature, a survey certificate from no county entity, and some typed correspondence that made my jaw drop were inside. Warren wrote, "I, Warren, am pleased to allow Mapleview HOA to install the septic structure on my property." This email was followed by a HOA invoice to Warren for a large fee for the right to use the property. I displayed my deed, county-approved survey, and property tax statements. As I explained, the board members became more horrified. They realized they were duped. I told them they had trespassed, built on private property, and could face civil and criminal charges for property damage if they didn't fix it. Warren was the real culprit. He exploited their naive belief that official papers were valid. The following week was busy. No construction was allowed by the HOA. They hired a second survey crew to confirm the septic system was on my land. After confirmation, we had a tense meeting. The HOA president, looking ashamed and exasperated, told me they had deposited a large sum into Warren's account to secure legal rights for the tank. They asked, "What do we do now? We've built the structure." Most of the system was buried, making relocation expensive. They wanted me to consider letting the septic system stay on my land for monthly compensation. They offered me, the real owner, the same contract they offered Warren. I didn't want someone else's septic tank on my land, especially one that served nearly half of Mapleview. I said it was a liability nightmare. No environmental hazards or code violations, please. I also disliked long-term infiltration line negotiations. Additionally, the area was less than 40 feet from part of my orchard, which could contaminate decades of my family's labor. The HOA offered a high monthly fee, but I refused. I told them that removing the septic system and restoring my land was my best option. Naturally, that's expensive. After realizing they'd been duped, the HOA board had 2 options: pay me to keep the system or pay a lot to remove it and move it within their boundaries. I demanded its removal again. They made a final offer, promising to never pay property taxes on that land if I accepted a permanent easement. It was absurd. They couldn't stop me from paying property taxes. I also didn't want to be legally bound by another HOA. Behind the scenes, I immediately contacted an attorney. My attorney said my case was simple trespass, unauthorized construction, and fraud. The HOA was responsible for the incursion despite Warren's lies, which were especially egregious. My attorney advised sending Mapleview HOA a formal letter demanding septic system removal and property damage compensation. We also threatened to sue for damages if unsatisfied. Mapleview HOA's attorneys likely realized they had no defense after reviewing the facts. After paying Warren, they had to pursue him to recover their money. But that was just one piece. Warren went to great lengths to avoid accountability. He ignored calls and skipped group meetings. His next text said, "Don't worry about it." I nearly laughed when the HOA said it was resolved. Resolved? Hardly. From my perspective, chaos was just beginning. My orchard land was partially dug up, and I had no idea if my giant septic tank was full or empty. I later learned the HOA confronted Warren about his lies. He claimed that it was all a misunderstanding, that I had given him permission verbally, and that the official documents weren't forged, but simply misfiled. My land records were clear, and the forged sale agreement had a cheap imitation of my signature. The Mapleview HOA attorney saw through this facade. Warren was the main suspect in their fraud and theft by deception report. HOA filed a civil suit to recover their down payment. My own complaint accused Warren of trespassing and fraud. My attorney provided authentic property records and proof that Warren had intentionally misrepresented ownership in a detailed brief. Local sheriffs sent detectives to investigate. During that investigation, the detective found more suspicious activity linked to Warren, including some failed real estate flips, He appeared to have forged documents. His forging spree had never before caught up with him so severely. After gathering evidence, the district attorney filed charges. When Warren was tried for fraud, the prosecution showed that he had defrauded Mapleview HOA of a large sum of money. They showed how he forged my name and manipulated documents, slam dunk case. Warren was imprisoned for 2.5 years for fraud. Mapleview HOA had to remove the septic tank. Their goal was to remove the tank quickly and quietly, but it's no easy feat. Excavation, dismantling, and filling the ground took weeks. I endured construction noise, heavy machinery, and the overwhelming stench of an improperly installed tank. Luckily, it had not been in use for long, but it still had wastewater in it. The HOA hired specialized crews to pump out and safely dispose of the contents and haul away the materials. I also had property damage repaired. I demanded they replant the grass and grade the soil to restore the orchard boundary. Land was restored nearly to its original state. In the settlement, the HOA paid for my extra time and money on improvements. A settlement negotiated by my attorney required Mapleview HOA to pay my legal fees and a large amount for the temporary trespass and inconvenience. They initially resisted paying so much. They gave up after realizing that a separate civil claim would cost more and draw negative attention. I used a large check from them to improve my property. I replaced old fencing, planted fruit trees, and restored a barn. Ironically, the orchard threatened by a septic tank is now thriving. From what I heard, Mapleview HOA was furious with Warren. They felt betrayed and humiliated for falling for his con. From my perspective, the HOA was also partly responsible. They neglected property line verification. They used suspicious documents without contacting me or the county clerk. Because it was convenient and cheap, they trusted Warren. They paid dearly for that mistake. Experience must have taught them that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I don't hate Mapleview HOA because they were negligent but took responsibility. They apologized, cooperated with authorities, and paid for repairs and other damages. By testifying that Warren approached them with forged papers, they helped sentence him. Warren was unrepentant when it came to the consequences. I attended the sentencing hearing to observe. He asked for leniency, saying he had made some mistakes due to financial hardships. But the judge refused. The prosecution had emails, signed documents, and notary statements Warren tried to bribe. A thorough takedown. When I heard the sentence, 2.5 years in prison, I felt strangely relieved. I didn't see another subplot coming. Warren's fiancée, Marjorie, was unaware of his scam. She lived with him in a small house a block from mine. She contacted me after his arrest, saying she had no idea what he was doing. She feared losing their home, especially since Mapleview HOA was suing for Warren's spent funds. Her name was on the mortgage, so if the bank foreclosed due to his legal issues, she would be liable. I was tempted to stay away, but she seemed upset and unaware of Warren's plan. Marjorie told me her story over coffee. Warren had been restless for months, mumbling about big plans and soon will be set for life. She never saw the forged documents, heard about the septic project, or knew he was claiming my land. She said she would have reported this if she had seen anything. He seemed to be selling real estate, she thought. I don't believe everything she said, but she was probably unaware of the details. Marjorie asked if I would write a letter stating that she was not involved in the fraud. I told her I'd only tell the truth if the authorities asked, that I had no evidence she was involved, and that she hadn't asked me to negotiate anything for Warren. Her thanks ended it. I felt sorry for Marjorie, but not Warren. After Warren was jailed, she was broke and responsible for her finances. She sold their house to pay restitution. In Mapleview HOA's civil suit, the judge ordered Warren to repay the large sum they gave him, which fell on her while he was in prison. My attorney kept me informed of legal proceedings in the months that followed. The county inspector made several follow-up visits to ensure the septic site was fully removed and sanitized. Luckily, Mapleview HOA met all those requirements. They wanted no more fines or lawsuits. After everything, the orchard was back in order. The land looked great, and I had a nice bank account settlement. My property perimeter now has a larger fence. I changed the fence from decorative to functional with a sturdy chain-link fence and a small sign reading, "Private property, no trespassing." I wasn't messing around anymore. Interesting, the fiasco actually highlighted my property lines. New neighbors from a different street asked about our parcel lines. Following the septic tank scandal, they wanted to avoid similar issues. I liked their initiative. We walked the property lines, checked the marker stakes, and made sure we knew where everything started and ended. I met some people I'd only seen briefly and had some surprisingly friendly conversations. That ordeal improved communication between neighbors who respect each other's rights. My Warren problems continued, at least partially. He wrote me while in prison. The handwritten note arrived unexpectedly. He claimed he was wrongfully convicted, had proof I had secretly sold him the land, and that it was all a big misunderstanding. He even suggested my refusal to keep the septic tank was racially or personally motivated. That letter made no sense since we share a background and had never discussed such topics. It was a desperate attempt to cause trouble or get me to respond. I ignored it as advised by my attorney. Warren sent a second letter, offering to share HOA money if I recanted my statements to help him leave sooner. Given that money was part of restitution, that was ridiculous. I ignored it again. Letters stopped eventually. He probably realized I wouldn't budge. A few months later, a friend told me Warren failed to appeal his conviction. Not surprised at all. With the evidence against him, no appeals court would find him innocent. He forged documents, took large payments, and illegally installed a septic tank on my land. There was no argument. Mapleview HOA sent a statement to residents in their monthly bulletin around the same time. One of my neighborhood friends gave me a copy. The statement said they had unforeseen circumstances with a property arrangement, that an outside party had defrauded the association, and that legal action had been taken. They assured that fees would remain stable and that the septic system had been relocated. Apparently, their new site was more expensive, but they learned a hard lesson about property title verification. If that lesson prevents them from damaging others' property, fine. After that, I felt better. Hidden sewage lines didn't bother me walking my orchard. I could sleep knowing no unscrupulous neighbor would try to sell my heritage again. Peace was priceless, even compared to my settlement. However, the settlement was welcome compensation for months of headaches. Was Warren's brazenness the strangest part of this experience? My neighbor lived next to my orchard, not a stranger. You'd think a fraudster would choose a target out of your daily view. But maybe his proximity gave him confidence, or maybe he thought I'd never find out. Whatever his logic, he learned that attempting to bluff official documents will get you caught. I later discovered that Warren had been telling locals that he had inherited money from a distant relative and was using it to fund home improvements. Several neighbors told me that he boasted about adding a gazebo, shed, and walkway on the land behind his house. He shrugged when asked how he got the permit for all that. Some said they saw big trucks on Warren's property and assumed he was renovating extensively. It shows how easily someone can lie if they're not questioned. Warren was a smooth talker until reality hit. While we often emphasize buyer beware, we should also emphasize community beware. If you see someone building on land you thought belonged to a neighbor, it may be worth asking a few polite questions. Mapleview HOA could have confirmed everything sooner by writing or calling me. We all get busy and assume others are handling things right, but property matters require cross-checking. This disaster prompted me to protect my property records. I had my deed recorded at the county clerk's office and updated with a new survey that marked each boundary point with GPS coordinates. I asked the county clerk to note the fraud in the file so anyone who tries to replicate Warren's trick can see it. It may be overkill, but after this, I'd rather be prepared than vulnerable. I also learned to watch out for neighbors who seem suspiciously interested in your property lines. No need to get paranoid, but if someone keeps asking about boundaries, offering to buy small chunks of your land without a formal process, or claiming they can do something on your acreage, get everything in writing and check the county records. Don't assume curiosity. They may be preparing for something more devious. The collaboration between local law enforcement and the legal system after the facts were clear was fascinating. The detective on my case was thorough. Besides me, Mapleview HOA officials and other neighbors were interviewed. He checked Warren's documents at the county recorder's office. When the detective saw how carefully Warren had covered his tracks, he became more determined. He told me, "You wouldn't believe how many people try to fudge documents." At trial, the forensic document examiner detailed how Warren forged his signature, saying he practiced copying my handwriting from some older forms I'd shared with the neighborhood, possibly a petition I signed to improve local roads. Our local news briefly covered Warren's sentencing. The reporters described the bizarre scheme: a neighbor pretending to own someone else's land, forging documents, convincing a HOA to build a septic tank, and running off with the money. Verifying real estate transactions was crucial, and they advised readers to stay vigilant. I didn't like the spotlight, but it alerted the community to these scams. My biggest win, besides getting my land restored in the settlement, is that the orchard seems stronger after the soil was regraded. New topsoil, fertilizers to neutralize contamination risk, and careful replanting revitalized my fruit trees. My harvest that season was one of the best. In a poetic twist, the orchard seemed to be celebrating our victory over a vile intrusion. I was surprised by the abundant blooms on some older trees that had been less fruitful. Maybe it was a lucky year for weather, but I saw it as a symbol of justice served. Warren was imprisoned and Mapleview HOA removed the septic tank, giving me great closure. Although closure didn't eliminate my stress and anxiety, it taught me valuable lessons. I learned how far desperate people will go to get money, and I learned that even official-looking organizations can be fooled without basic checks. I learned that while I prefer a quiet life, you sometimes have to fight for your rights loudly. Letting a problem simmer or hope it will go away rarely works, especially in property disputes. If I had ignored the signs, Mapleview HOA might have finished and operated the septic tank, making removal a nightmare. I achieved results before it became too difficult to reverse by acting quickly and involving my attorney. Finally, I'm glad the law upheld the truth. Warren was properly punished for his deception. Mapleview HOA learned about land ownership verification and hopefully humility. My orchard is still strong because my grandparents worked hard to clear and plant this land decades ago. I feel great knowing I did them right by defending what they worked so hard to build. I lived it and can attest to the fact that someone could build a septic tank on someone else's land. It happened. People and organizations can be that bold and naive. This isn't a warning to distrust others, but it is a reminder to do your homework when big projects arrive. Request official records, signatures, and county clerk assistance. If Mapleview HOA had done a little of that, they would have found out before digging. After everything, I'm still on my property and plan to stay for years. I'm making improvements, enjoying orchard fruit, and watching for nonsense. I think of my father saying, "If you don't protect what's yours, no one else will." If he could see what happened, he'd say I handled it well. He might joke that I'm the local expert on removing a septic tank you never asked for. For anyone reading this, keep your property documents organized, safe, and wary of neighbors who seem interested in your land. Ignoring suspicious behavior may cost more than you think. Dealing with an unauthorized septic system and a neighborhood fraudster is terrifying. With determination, good legal representation, and a willingness to fight for justice, you can win. The best part of this story is knowing that my land is mine. No trespassing, no infiltration lines, no shady deals. Deception cost Warren jail time, restitution, and a tarnished reputation that may last. Mapleview HOA lost money, time, and goodwill, but they'll survive, hopefully wiser. I sleep well knowing that the orchard my grandparents left me is safe and thriving, and that no one will mistake my backyard for something they can buy or sell without my permission. Friends, thank you. See you soon.